no matter what.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Alana here. Welcome back to 3 Degrees of Love, 3 Degrees of Love Divination. So, I wanted to talk to you guys more today more about therapy and tarot, and and just sort of talking more about healing journey that I've been on and stuff like that. So, and I just happened to be sitting here and sort of reflecting on things and my day and life and my journey, thus far. And there were, just a few things that, that came up, and, and why, again, when I talk about, the fact that, we're in the middle of a global mental health crisis, and why understanding that and remembering that is important, right? Because, like I said, mental health is health, and what we think, our mind controls our bodies, right? How our speech, our actions, everything, right? And so when we don't address our mental health, and we don't sort of value that, that's sort of, to me, that's sort of the beginning of who we are, right? We're beings. We're not machines. We're human beings. And we have to, honor every aspect of that, right? Of what makes us who we are. And to make sure that it's functioning the best that it can. So when our minds are mumble jumble and scrambled by by trauma and those things, has created pain in our hearts, right? We sort of develop this sort of false illusion on what certain things are, and stuff like that. So, and given how the idea of cause and effect, and how when we experience trauma, and how that can affect us, and how we can see the patterns, right? And oftentimes when there is a generational pattern of trauma, right, and that it goes unresolved through the generations, it gets picked up by the offspring, right? It gets picked up, and it ends up being the children that have to bear that, and one of the things that I've come to realize about people, and in my in my observation, and as that's sort of very analytical mind, and sometimes it can be a very dangerous cycle for me, because oftentimes it can what can happen to, especially when you've endured trauma, and you have certain abilities, certain strengths, if you will, either it can get heightened, and we either tip the scales in one way or another, right? So the mind is so intricate. It's just in the way things, and it goes back to the video that, you know, I did with the beloved Priscilla from A Life Full of Simplicity, is you know, the iceberg model. We talked about that in that video, right? And then we showed some decks and stuff like that. If you haven't checked that out, by all means, you know, definitely, you know, and so, you know, when you see a person, you have to sort of think, there's the iceberg. What you see on the surface, what you see, how you see that person, how they present themselves, that isn't always, you know, the case, right? So, and how we end up presenting ourselves to the rest of the world, you know, ends up being influenced by many different factors, right? What we've gone through, our heritage, our, you know, our upbringings and things like that. And when we've endured trauma, especially if we endured trauma, you know, at home, or, you know, with the family unit, in the family unit, to any capacity, right? Like, I mean, those of you, you know, who've experienced trauma could fill in, you know, those blanks and things like that. But you know, it alters our perception, and we go into a mode for survival, right? And whatever, you know, sort of category of survival mode, right? And I also talked about, you know, in that video, and I've mentioned this before in previous videos, which is also why I talk about shadow work, and why shadow work is also important, especially from, you know, psychological, you know, clinical perspective, but also how I've, you know, the combination with tarot practice and stuff like that, and just seeing, you know, the involvement, you know, and the growth where that is concerned. And yet, you know, there's so many different stigmas, right? And that's why it goes back to when I talking about, it's not the practice, it's the intent, right? And where I talk about the law of karma and you know, why it all matters, and it's all important, right? You know, I remember, you know, one of the things actually in therapy, you know, and even in, you know, again, if I'm combining my educational experience and my professional experience and stuff like that, plus all, you know, all the stuff I'm learning, you know, in therapy, and, you know, and stuff like that. But the reason why, you know, one a part of the healing journey, when, you know, and when you're participating in therapy sessions and things like that, one of the things that, even from, you know, in a social work sort of psychology type of aspect, clinical, whatever you wanna say, and when we're tackling and dealing with, you know, certain mental health issues, like, you know, depression and anxiety and stuff like that, right? These are sort of the now psychological sort of breakdowns of the mind, if you will, based on certain, you know, stresses, and if we look at things generationally too, right? Certain things become embedded into our ancestral, our DNA, our right ancestry, and why, you know, knowing our heritage and honoring that is also important, and the idea of shadow work. And anyways, that's, I could go on about so many different things, anyways. But yes, so why, again, sort of bringing it back to therapy and why, you know, some of the practices and sort of the healing therapy practices, if you will. That's what I'm trying to get at, I guess. Totally just did a roundabout loop. Anyways, so one of the things, you know, and we talk a lot about mindfulness and mindful practices and why things like meditation is important, and slowing down, and, you know, taking a breather, taking a step back, because when we are in a state of whether it, you know, like, especially, you know, when we have unhealed trauma and things like that, you know, we can easily react in very sort of impulsive, thoughtless ways. And if we're understanding the law of karma and the understanding of what that is, right? You know, the intent, you know, and I talk about, you know, the sort of the understanding of the balance between good and evil, and when we tip the scales, you know, in the belief that we are deserving of something more than someone else, you know, and that thought process doesn't mean that you necessarily, you know, that thought, like, if you, so when you're using the idea of your pain and you hold on to that as a reason for why you justify your actions to certain things, especially against someone else, you know, we end up creating negative cycles, you know, of the same sort of karmic patterns over and over again. It's not until we identify, we take the step back, you know, do that sort of meditation to, you know, to ground ourselves and center ourselves, to, you know, see ourselves, you know, as beings that you know, coexist, right? When the minute we become the sort of this selfishness, and we use that as a justification to deal with our to protect our guests, our hearts, right? And have that belief that this is how we're doing, rather than working out and going. And this is why therapy and mindfulness and the understanding, to me, is important, because we can understand where and again, when I talk about and I recommend these books, and I'll go again, I Save People and Boundaries, right? We can end up creating boundaries that are false, right? Out of fear. And if we break down and use fear as a form of defense and weaponry, which can happen because of trauma, right? And we find ourselves in these pattern states of you know, traumatic sort of behaviors that we end up the cause and effect cycle that continues on. It's not until when we take a step back and, you know, as I say, the sort of take the feelings out of it and separate yourself from the feelings, you're able to see the bigger picture, to see where your past traumas, unhealed past traumas, create negative or false or fears, right? False, and if we break down what the word fear is, you know, false evidence appearing real, right? That's psychological now. That's the mind, right? So trauma attacked against the heart, right? And we don't heal that wounding, right? And we don't address that. We don't do the shadow work and work that out. If we don't, and this is also kind of where I talk about, I talk about, you know, and why to me, I hold true to spirituality and understanding spirituality and heritage. I grew up as, you know, a Roman Catholic. I grew up as you know, Christianity. And the thing is, you know, when I also talk about, you know, healing, right, and religion, and the problem with religion, you know, and what it sometimes can create, this sort of, and it's been, you know, weaponized for a sense of control. When, and again, I talk about trauma against the heart, right? When we don't face our fears, we don't face the trauma, we don't do the healing work, and we run from it rather as a form of and we think that's healing, and we don't face our shadows, you know, the behaviors that we then encapsulate now, or as a form of protection against the heart, because of the fear of pain, because we've endured it, right? We end up creating false senses of entitlement because of that, because we have this, right? So the idea of spirituality, and why to me it's important, because it's a form of grounding and staying true to my roots, my heritage, right? And so, you know, I also know that, you know, to take certain things with a grain of salt, because I've seen the hypocrisy and stuff like that, and there's so much more. Anyway, that's a whole nother, I can totally probably do a whole nother other video about that. So, right. So again, you know, and how I combine all of that, the therapy for this healing journey and all of that, right? You know, and so remembering some of my teachings, right? For, you know, and I lean on some of those prayers for grounding, you know, and also part of meditation and things like that, you know. But so the one thing, again, as I work and do my therapy, and I'm mindful, right? And the reason and why mindfulness is important, right? And so here's how I sort of see why mindfulness and practicing mindfulness every day is an important thing to develop as part of healing as well, not just for yourself but for other people, right? Because again, we're talking about the law of karma, and right, but like, we're not mindful when we go about our everyday life, right? Like, to me, the equivalent of what that would be is anybody who's been a driver, like who you know, who drives a car, or, you know, operates any sort of a machinery, and has ever and you know, and why it's important to take time out to rest. Why rest is important, because we create, anyways. Yes, a million different thoughts all at once, and I can go several down different rabbit holes. So where was I? Talking about spirituality and stuff like that, and how I combine that with therapy, right? So, you know, one of the prayers that I hold, or well, rather it's a scripture, but you know, what is love? And I talk about that, and I've talked that in previous videos, and you know, and remembering that. But then so keeping that scripture in mind as every day, which is love is patient, love is kind, blah blah blah, right? So I keep that, and I have that in the back of my mind, and as I'm meditating and I'm being mindful, right, and I'm doing my therapy, I'm thinking about all of these things that in life, like, because I'm also very analytical and a very, sit back and analyze and observer, and I guess also that's, how I've, come to be, anyway, whole nother thing. But yeah, like, so, with my, therapy and stuff like that, and the understanding of why mindfulness is important, and connecting that again to the law of karma, if we are using our pain and our trauma as a justification to demand, to be demanding, or to as an excuse, because we have the unhealed trauma, right? We haven't addressed those. We're running away from it, so we're not doing the shadow work. We're not doing any of those things, and then we keep repeating the same cycles. We just continue to create pain, right? Like further. So when we don't take responsibility for our actions, and we're not mindful, like, right, like the understanding too of mindfulness is mindfulness as a whole, not just acknowledging your pain, right, and what you've been through, and forgiving yourself and forgiving others, right? When we hang on to that and we use that as that's that darkness part, that we tip the scales. There's one thing to be protective, but it's another thing to then weaponize, if you will, right? There's those are the sort of, I would say, the two different negative aspects, right? When we run away and we don't heal, right? So we don't deal with and address, the aspects of the truth of the aspects of where our pain truly comes from, right? And especially acts against childhood trauma, that can really paint a very negative, sort of miscued view on how we end up dealing with things, and to me, that's how we create false boundaries too over time, that end up, especially when we don't handle the pain, we end up sort of, we don't address it, we put a band-aid over it, right? The other thing, how I also see the when we don't take accountability for the choices we make. We understand that, trauma can really impact us in a way that ends up influencing our choices, right? And the choices that we make. But we have to now, the understanding of healing, there's one the one side with the protective side, right? The justification for the protective side because of what we've been through. To have, right? Boundaries are important. Boundaries are important because it helps to keep the, you know, the balance of, you know, of ourselves. Because too much, when we give too much, we break ourselves down. But we also have to realize that when we completely close ourselves off, you know, and we believe we're more deserving of something more than someone else, again, we tip those scales, like I said, that sort of karmic scale, if you will, right? So why therapy is important is because it helps to clear that sort of mental fog on what we sort of believe we are deserving more from someone else. Because if we're recognizing and we're seeing ourselves as human beings, right, then the iceberg effect, we can understand that what we see, just because we see someone else, you know, seemingly a certain way, doesn't mean that under the surface they don't have trauma just like you. Doesn't mean that under the surface they might be, their actions might be caused because of certain things, right? But the other aspect to realize, right, and then again it goes down to accountability, right? We have to understand it seems like a lot of work, and it can be, right? Like, to think about it, like, even just to explain it for how I'm explaining it, I feel like there's so much that it entails, right? But where therapy comes in, and to me, you know, where meditation and all this stuff, there are strategies these are strategies to sort of help that whole process happen, and we are able to then connect the dots to actually heal ourselves the appropriate way, so that when now we are then we can be now more mindful of our choices, right? And how we interact with the world. So now sort of how that, right? How that connects again to sort of the anecdote, or the autopilot, what I was talking about earlier, right? And, you know, when we don't take the time to process all this information, and we just sort of instinctually respond, that whole cause and effect, right? That's how we end up still in these negative karmic cycles over and over again. And the only way to stop it, right, is to address them, right? So why all of this is important is, and I say, bring it back again to the analogy that I was trying to still haven't gotten to, is the idea of being on autopilot, right? And so if you've ever driven a car and you're a driver, and the idea of repetition, right? And we get so used to things, right? So like those that, you know, we take the same route every day to go to work, you know, and come home, and stuff like that. And when we can be in the middle of doing something, when we're not in the present, we're not being mindful, right? How many, I want to know, please, in the comments, if you've ever experienced a moment of autopilot, taking the same route home, driving, and you remember getting into the car at the start. So let's say you left work and you got into your car at work, and you remember getting into the car at work. But you have been so preoccupied, your thoughts, so many thoughts are going. You are thinking about you're thinking about, you know, your bills, you're thinking about the fact that you have, you know, you have to prepare, and okay, and you have, and the more you are stuck thinking about your past, your future, I don't know, your whatever, right? You're not focused on what you're doing. And there's that sort of conscious sort of divide. And this is how our brains can be fascinating too, because we can, right? Like, you know, if you've gotten into your car and somewhere along the way you don't remember and can't sort of recall getting home, but then your next thought or your next memory, conscious memory, is being at home, and there's no recollection of what actually happened in between, like physically. You probably can recall where your thoughts were, what you last thought, but you cannot, that connection between your body and your mind, there's that disconnect, and what happened in between. So when you're not conscious and mindful of what you're doing every day, and you get into that robotic mode, you end up falling into patterns without even realizing it, right? Well, that's, to me, that's like going through life, period, right? Even our interactions with other people, right? When we don't take and are not paying attention and not being mindful, when we don't do the healing work, right? We lead with our emotions, we blend with our emotions and lead with our emotions. We don't address them and where they come from and why, and those thoughts, which to me comes through the therapy, right? And even combining tarot, you know, it gives you that sort of, that in your face pictorial observation, if you will, and you know, of managing and seeing our patterns of behavior and how that can keep us stuck. And when we're not mindful of these, how we can keep us stuck in these sort of karmic patterns, rippling effects that affect not just ourselves but the betterment of each other, and you know, we can misview and misinterpret information when we're not mindful, because there's that disconnect, right? We feel like so, and so again, when I talk about evil and the ego is the part that believes, and when it becomes inflated, and trauma can do that to you, right? This, you know, well, because this happened, I therefore, but when you get into that mode of believing that, you end up emotionally taking from others without realizing it, creating trauma for somebody else that then invokes behavior that then can, and so on and so forth, and the butterfly effect and the rippling effect. And it's not just, right? And and while the person or the people that are closest to us, you know, who we may have endured pain with, but we are still close to, when we get stuck in this sort of repetitive karmic cycle, and we are, right, that ego, especially when there's familial ties, whatever, there's it and that, again, therapy, being able to separate our emotions, you know, is to see the bigger picture is also very important. But even just as, you know, how that relates to not just with, like I said, not just with our family, right? Because to me, if we're thinking about human experience, right? Everything that we do with anyone, any dynamic, matters. But it even is more so for the people we care about and the people that we love, to really be mindful, because then we end up, when we don't heal and take stock of how and take responsibility for our actions and how it creates the rippling effect, we end up now in this sort of karmic, painful cycle. And it's not until we take responsibility for everything, not just the pain we've endured, but for the pain that we've inflicted, right? And taking responsibility and recognizing that for change. It's not, we realize that's how we break. It takes teamwork, right? So it takes, and that's the same for any sort of relationship or dynamic. But even to me, you know, it's the relationship we have with ourselves, right? Understanding and taking responsibility for the negativity that we create for ourselves, right? By our certain behaviors, right? But also how that affects the ones we hold dear, the ones that we value the most, right? But we should be valuing everybody. So, because everything we do impacts another person. So valuing human life in every aspect, body, mind, and spirit, is important. Why therapy for healing is important, and how combining that with other aspects like meditation, like tarot, like my religious upbringing, all of that, combining all of that has been important for me. You know, and why I think is even just, I feel like is an important thing for healing for everybody. We have to be, you know, we come from love, we're created in love, so we have to, and since we desire love, we have to be willing to give it. We have to, right? It's the giving aspect, the flow, the every, that keeps us going, right? And when we don't respect that, we create friction, and sometimes unnecessary friction where there doesn't need to be. And it's not until we can identify both sides, the pain, and take responsibility for our choices, that are we able to then sort of collectively change? But it starts with ourselves. And my choice for therapy, my choice and to combine that, how I've combined that and what has worked for me, I stand by that wholeheartedly. I stand behind it purely, and I will defend it with the highest integrity, always. That has been my greatest value. It's I value, what those aspects of my upbringing, and my faith and my heritage, and I hold true to that. But I also take the step back and can see the false negatives, the hurtful aspects that were forced and created a certain thing that sort of influenced the choices that I made throughout my life that have brought me to where I'm at today. But I'm also grateful and thankful for those experiences, because it's also what has gotten me here today. It has taught me a lot. It is also part of me, what created me. And in order to love appropriately, I have to love me and everything that created me. But I also know, and I also recognize that in the pain that I've endured throughout my life, the impact that it has had, the weight of it all that continues to follow me, I know that the only way for me to be able to have the strength to carry all of that is a collective supportive foundation. And that has been through these various means. And I will forever be grateful. I will forever be grateful to the people who taught me, who brought me here, who have continued to support me, to give love, in the ways that they have, acknowledging the ways in which those have benefited me and helped me bring me to this point. Honoring my heritage and using my knowledge and everything and the combination of everything that I've learned, not only to keep myself strong, to keep going, to be able to continue giving the love that I know I deserve to myself, but also to those I love around me, that I know everyone is deserving of. This is how I do it. This is how I am doing it. Through regular therapy sessions, through meditation work, through the introspection, through the tarot, through my religious upbringing, all of it. All of it. All of it. Is what is holding me together. I am love. I see others the same way because I know what it's like to be without, what it feels like to be deprived, to have endured the trauma. I seen it. I know how destructive it can be. And so I know why doing the shadow work, why all that's important, why mental health is important, and why I will always be an advocate for that, why I chose the profession I chose, and why I still choose to give love, regardless of what I've endured. However, I do know that because of what I endured, what my limits are, and what I need to stand up for in order to be okay. It's not a perfect world. It's not a perfect process. It hasn't been. It still isn't. But I'm doing the best that I can. And healing is not something that happens overnight. It's a lot of work. It has been a lot of work, and it can take its toll. But is it necessary? Is it for functioning and even just to exist as a whole being? Yeah, it is. It really is. And I see the destruction that we have caused one another. And it hurts. I know what I've endured. I know what I feel responsible for, that I have caused. But I also know and recognize why I've made the choices I made. I forgive myself for them. I am trying to learn from them. To do better for myself and others. So I hope, with that being said, that will be inspiring for others to take the time to do the same for every aspect. And I hope that you can see why love to me is important, why knowing the truth about love is important, and why it's important to give unto others as you want to receive for yourself. When we understand the law of karma and balance and wholeness and equality and the meaning of the human experience, we can see why, to me, the balance of mind, body, and spirit is important. It's why I named this channel 3 Degrees of Love. And it's why I always say I am love, and so are you. And I can truly and wholeheartedly say that I, Alana Banana, love you, because I love me too. And with that being said, take care of yourself and each other, and please live, listen, and learn always. I love you. Bye.
Gotta love, gotta love, gotta love one another. Gotta love, gotta love, gotta love one another. Gotta love, gotta love, gotta love one another. No matter what people want.